All right, so welcome everyone. We are super excited to have our first ever Atlanta Evolve Law event. So thank you for being an early adopter and welcome. We are having a wonderful panel today on legal tech innovation. And before that happens, I just want to tell you a tiny bit more about Evolve Law. So this is our favorite quote. We are very inspired by Darwin, so you'll see some Darwin-esque themes. And the quote that may or may not be attributed to him, but we're going to go with it, which is, "It's not the strongest of the species that survive or the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change." And we find that to be very relevant in the legal technology space, and you guys are all early adopters responding to change just by being here, so thank you so much. But what is Evolve Law? So Evolve Law is an organization that Mary and I created as legal tech entrepreneurs to help be a catalyst for change and adoption of technology and innovation in the legal industry. So we, like many of you who are entrepreneurs in the space, maybe we're a little frustrated by the slight, slowness of lawyers adopting technology, a little bit of risk aversion, get there eventually, but maybe a little bit slower. So we do a bunch of things to help expedite the adoption, to encourage more adoption, and things like these events. We hold them around the country. I think we did over 20 events last year. And in every market around the country, around the U.S., we have members. We have almost 100 members now who are innovators, ranging from single solo founders who are just launching their first product, to law firms, to the Avvo, Clio, and LegalZooms of the world. And we're really excited to continue to be growing faster than we even expected. And Thomson Reuters.
Whatever. I'm on Clio, that's what matters.
Thomson Reuters.
Or just buy them.
And eventually Dentons, right? So we do content events. We're doing a lot of things to facilitate relationships in the space. Check out our website, evolvelawnow.com. And we have things like a job board for legal tech jobs, and all of this content, including this video tonight, will be posted on our website. So if you miss an event or you can't make it to New York or Seattle or wherever we're hosting events that are interesting topics to you, we post them all online for you. So that is who we are. And I'm going to leave this up and hand it over to Mary Jen.
Okay. Well, tonight we have a really interesting panel. Dan is going to read the slides first. So I am going to ask a couple questions of the audience before we get started with the panel. So how many of you here are lawyers, recovering or, okay? How many of you are in-house? Okay, that would be none. How many of you are investors? Yes, you are. And how many of you are entrepreneurs? Okay, interesting. Lawyers and entrepreneurs, yes. So we've got the right people in the room. So tonight we want to talk about innovation and adoption. And I'm going to introduce our panel, and each of them has shared a brief bio and then an unusual fact. So this is kind of fun. So starting, because this is the order that I have it in, at the end we have, almost said in order, we have Steve Best, who is an attorney, and he's one of the founding partners of the Affinity Consulting Group. He's got a background in law, accounting, and economics, and he consults with law firms throughout the U.S. on law office software and sophisticated practice management and document management issues. And he's written a book called The Lawyer's Guide to PC Law, which was published by the ABA in 2015. And his unusual fact was that Steve studied the piano since the age of 5, and he was training to be a concert pianist until he gave that up to practice law. Why is the question of, and he even wrote to me, I still wonder why I made that choice. So I like his aspirational plans, which are to compose music for a stage musical and conduct a symphony one day. So that's Steve, and you are native to Atlanta, correct?
I'm a transplant, but I live here. I've lived here for 18 years.
Okay. We're going to add that in from everybody. And then next we have Jackie Champagne, who is the president and founder of the Champagne Group, which is an executive search and consulting firm. She assists clients to compete in what, I love when people use this word, the evolving legal services market. And she believes that adoption of legal tech and innovative business models can positively transform the law of practice. So we need more people like Jackie. Her unusual fact is that she spent a year teaching law in China, where she first discovered, I can't say this word,
Sriracha.
sriracha, which is something my husband puts on everything, which she uses at about every meal now
He and I
too.
would get along well.
So next we have, leaping to the end, we have Dan Jansen, who's the CEO of Next Law Labs and a serial entrepreneur in many diverse sectors, which includes social media, financial services, and online recruiting. And he, as the CEO, he has, so Next Law Labs, for all of us here who don't know, is a completely autonomous subsidiary of Dentons, which is the largest law firm in the world, which again, thank you for having us here. And so it's a global collaborative innovation platform. It's a mouthful. And it's focused on developing, deploying, investing in new technologies. And they have 14 companies now, Dan, that you're working with. And they're working on transforming the practice of law around the world. And is that
Our humble goal.
yeah, well, as the largest law firm, it makes sense that that's your goal. And so the unusual fact is that Dan is the mayor of a small ski town that you might have heard of in Colorado, which is Telluride. So that's cool. So he is not from Atlanta. Jackie, you are here.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
No, I'm Chicago, Milwaukee area.
okay. So next, last but not least, we have Ed, who is the Vice President of Product Management and Partnerships at Thomson Reuters, one of our members, Legal Managed Services, and he has responsibility for all product life cycles and partnerships. And he also writes for Above the Law legal column, and it's the alt legal column, at Above the Law. And he talks about alternate legal services, legal technology, and he frequently exhibits the qualities of the oldest millennial in the room. So we'll have to do some comparison of IDs afterwards. And the unusual fact about Ed is that after 5.5 years in big law, he and his wife moved to New Delhi. How do you pronounce it?
New Delhi.
New Delhi, India, where for over 2 years, he oversaw and innovated the delivery of managed legal services with hundreds of Indian lawyers. So that is a very interesting, diverse panel. And Ed, you do live here, right?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So what we're going to do tonight is a little bit, because we have a smaller group, we're going to do a little bit of down the table with some answers, and then if people want to ask questions on that topic or contribute themselves, we'll do that in a respectful, managed fashion, which is our goal. So the first question, and I will just start at the end with Steve, who's playing with his microphone.
Making sure it's on.
Okay. Okay, so first, to start off, what are your thoughts, Steve, on the trends in legal adoption? Can you give us your sort of couple minutes on that, and then we'll go down the panel?
The trends in legal adoption.
Yes.
Okay. I think we're going to see a change in the next 5 years. You know, there's always been this prohibition by self-policing bar associations that only lawyers can own law firms. And I really, am beginning to feel that there's a change evolving in law. There's a change evolving where you're going to find that non-legal entities are going to begin to have interest in legal services. And we're starting to see it with things like LegalZoom, and we're starting to see it with, you know, online self-help legal services. I have a client, or I have a former client here in Atlanta who opened up an office in a Walmart. So I really think that that's something that's coming. I think there's going to be challenges. I bet there's going to be a Supreme Court case that's going to challenge it. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think that with technology behind it, lawyers are going to be able to reach out beyond the traditional four walls of a law firm. And I think companies, you know, big corporations are going to begin to take interest in legal services and to, you know, I think, you know, as we now, if you walk into local Target, you see an optometrist, and you see all kinds of different services that are available to you, professional services available to you at Target. And I think legal services are very shortly coming in that capacity as well.
So, I agree, but not as long. Ed and I were talking about when deregulation of the legal profession and you know, having non-lawyer ownership is going to occur. I'm a little bit more pessimistic as to the timeline. I think it's further down the road. But I think in the immediate future, you're going to have law firms, and I'm a little bit more law firm focused usually on the bigger firm end, because that's sort of where I came from. You're going to have firms finally using their data, organizing their data, and it not being what I call a garbage can of data, right? Because you can't use that kind of data, but really law firms being able to figure out what they have, figure out what they're doing, of course using technology and various tools like legal project management software, other kinds of software to start tracking what they're doing, because it's going to help them more and more, obviously budget going forward, but it's going to help you get to a state where eventually, and again, I think this is way down the road, a little dream I have is the predictive analytics and being able to predict, and I'm talking 10 years, I would give it 10 years down the road, being able to predict outcomes in litigation, spend at the beginning of a case, what a client's going to spend, what the result may be by building predictive models, because there are people who are already building those kinds of models. They're very rudimentary. It's got a long way to go, but to me that's going to short circuit, in particular, litigation. And right from the get-go, you're going to have clients looking at a piece of litigation and understanding, I'm going to spend X dollars on this, and it's got this percentage chance of settling anyway for this amount of money, and it's going to short circuit the whole process. I think that's further down the line. But in the immediate, I think and I think it should be, law firms should be using the data that they have, because it's very powerful to be able to help them really stop losing the market share that they're continuing to lose to alternative service providers. Okay.
Right, so, to focus on adoption specifically and the kind of next trends that are coming in adoption. I think that I agree with everything that was said in terms of some of these new trends and some of the hot things that are going to be coming to the market. I think that pressure from in-house counsel will be a factor. As corporate counsel, I was speaking with some GCs and they were saying, it no longer suffices for me to go to my board meetings and say, when everyone goes around the table and cites metrics as to their performance and utilization and what the potential risks are and what they need to report, to simply say, well, we hired King Spalding, so we'll see. We hired Denton, so we hired Cravath, like, probably it'll be good. Like that no longer is a sufficient justification to present your CEO. And I think that sort of in-house counsel pressure is an incubator that's going to drive change and visibility that comes with analytics and metrics and utilization of that data. I think in-house counsel legal departments are better poised in some ways than law firms to amass that data and to garner it and to utilize it. I'd say that one of the other major trends in adoption, I think maybe it's worth setting the table. How many of you feel like the adoption of legal technology is going like really well right now? Okay, it's not going, let's just table set for those of you watching at home, right? Like it's not going great, right? It's not, and I just got back from ILSA a couple of weeks ago, which is sort of like, I tire of kind of preaching to the choir and high-fiving each other, because it's like everyone's like so excited about technology, we're like all into it, but then they go back and they bemoan and groan about how all their lawyers are just incapable of adopting technology, and it's because they're artifacts from like the Paleolithic age and blah blah blah, and then let's have some drinks. I feel like that's not productive, right? There's a gap to where technology is advancing and where people are actually able to adopt it. And I'm passionate about this topic because of my new role as head of product for my business. I got to figure out how to get people to buy our stuff, and so. The bridges that bring us to some of these future trends, like some of these future waves, will be, in my view, products that are more uniquely designed, that take cues from intuitive technology from other industries, better training and consciousness inside of law firms and legal professionals, and hopefully smarter lawyers coming out of law school when it comes to technology. Although we're just talking about this, I don't know if that's even true. People are doing surveys at law schools, and it's horrendous, sort of the technology aptitude that's happening there. So I don't think that we can just assume that the younger generation of Pokemon is going to make it easier to do technology and legal. And then finally, I think the sort of clear and present trend that's going to help us get to some of these future states where we can utilize technology, where we're willing to embrace different models of delivering legal services, is actually the managed service model. Is when you go to a lawyer and you ask them, you know, I can make it easier for you to do it. Oh, that's cool. I'll train you how to do it. Okay, maybe I'll show up. Okay, we'll just do it for you. Okay, now you got my attention, right? Like, that's great. We'll just do it for you. And I think that managed service model, whether it's with a company like Thomson Reuters, or whether it is law firms that are building out some of that capacity through, you know, substantial practice services, litigation support, what, you know, technology that they're investing into, wholly owned subsidiaries that are seeking to, you know, find use cases for innovation, whatever it might be, that capacity of someone else stepping into the gap and being like, we're going to execute this on your behalf, we're going to do the vetting, we're going to figure out which technology actually makes sense in practice, and we're going to give you the proofs of concept and the use cases, and we're going to demonstrate that this can actually work. That's, I think, where lawyers feel like, oh, I can meet my ethical obligation to be tech savvy, and I can understand and make the most of the tools that are available to me without me having to become a technologist. Because that's not why I went to law school, right? And I think that that's going to be one of the important bridges that's going to help us get to adoption is the managed service model.
Good. I kind of feel like one of those newscasters you see on local TV who's looking in the wrong camera because everyone's over here. I want you to understand I love you all and I'm going to try to talk to all of you. No, I agree with everything that's been said. The one thing I would try to add to this is the global perspective. And while I appreciate we're here in the U.S., our focus is global and it's ROI driven. And with all due respect, the U.S. market, while it's the largest legal market in the world in this issue, some of these issues we're talking about is by no means leading. You know, our portfolio companies and opportunities, we have one in Berlin, a couple in the UK, one in Australia, you know, one in Canada, because that's where we're starting to see some really cutting edge kind of adoption and influential technologies coming in. You have to remember in the US, 75% of GCs don't think their lawyers are serious, or their law firms are serious about change. And so I would argue that we have a boiling frog issue here. And so a lot of the legal innovation, a lot of the adoption is going to come from the non-law firm players, which is a potentially career risky thing for a guy to say whose largest investor is the largest law firm in the world. But that's exactly why we started Next Law Labs. Rather than being a victim of this change, we want to own it and drive it. We're probably going to help out the balance sheet more than the P&L in the short term, and that's okay. Because when we look at these alternative markets, the frog needs to realize, you know, the big four accounting firms are some of the largest law firms in the world. There are 1,000+ legal tech companies around the world. A few years ago when we counted it, it was less than 50. And so the innovation is going to be coming from the side. We have a series of themes that Ty allowed, I happily go into them, where we see not only the technology trends, which are kind of the sexy end of the trends, less relevant when you start talking blockchain and AI and all that fun stuff. It's the use cases, you know, expert legal research, quality metrics, decision support, you know, in analytics, et cetera, et cetera. We see opportunities across the board in these things. We have investment putting our money where our mouth is against all of those use cases. And the final message I'd offer, because I want us to move on, is I have a chance to speak with some law schools frequently and the students. And my argument to them, especially those who are showing a little fear in their eyes, is that this is the most exciting time I can think of to be a young lawyer. Because while the traditional path to big law, for example, is perhaps evolving a little bit, you now have a $600-ish billion global industry that's ripe for reinvention and disruption. You now have 1,000 legal tech companies that are going to want to hire you not as a lawyer, but as a business person if you want that, to then help drive product change and evolution. And that's really, really kind of cool. And so I really encourage them to kind of look at it as the glass is way beyond full, and it's a great time to be coming up in this industry.
Okay, so we were talking about adoption, and I like how Ed said, you know, his job is to figure out how people are going to buy his stuff. But it's really about whether they're actually going to implement it, which is the problem that we see in that.
Is it though?
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's just, yeah. I mean, once they buy it, do they really know?
Do they really need to?
No, they do.
They do.
You can edit that part out.
But let's move past that. Let's assume they're going to buy it. So Dan touched a little bit on this, so maybe we'll start with Dan and go the other way back. Just what are, kind of in your opinion, what's the next big thing in legal innovation, and then we'll take some questions on this from the group. But just sort of, not a whole story, but just if you had to vote, which you do with your money, if you had to vote on what the next big trend is.
Yeah, and it's not very glamorous, but the best way to change a lawyer, well, you have to remember, when you walk into a partner meeting at a large law firm, you're walking into a room of millionaires and telling them that they're doing everything wrong, right? And that's pretty hard to convince them, because they have said, look, this billable hour thing, flawed as it is, do you want to see my new Tesla downstairs? I mean, things are doing okay. And so to try to convince them that they're boiling frog and things are going to change is pretty hard. So to me, the one thing about driving change is you get a client to ask a lawyer to change, and they are highly responsive to that. And so the trend I would identify, kind of on consistent with your question, is the emergence of the legal ops groups inside large corporate legal departments. It started kind of out in the Bay Area with Connie and others, with the technology companies, and they're charged with running the legal departments like a business. And the motto is, and this won't leave it out, faster, better, cheaper legal solutions. And it has grown from literally a lunch crowd of a few technology companies. Now it includes name your technology companies, Facebook, Adobe, Microsoft, on and on. It's growing across the countries, and so that trend is going to drive change. You're probably looking for sexy technologies, but I think the emergence of legal ops is one thing that's going to drive change. Because when you combine that with the fact that a lot of big legal departments are consolidating their panels from hundreds of law firms down to 5, 10, 20, those law firms or those clients are going to want to share in those efficiencies that they're creating in the law firms. And that's one of the reasons why Dentons is kind of targeting an industry structure that's going to approach more of the accounting industry structure, where a small number of players are going to have global market share, depth in the middle, and hundreds of thousands of small firms kind of being very specialized geographically and locally. So I think I might have wandered off your question.
That's okay.
All right.
I totally agree with everything. No, I think that's exactly
This is no
right.
fun. We're supposed to argue, aren't we?
Well, you're completely wrong about that. I'd say that some of the biggest trends in terms of some of that technology that Dan was talking about, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. The truth about artificial intelligence is that until, I forget, there's some famous person who said a famous quote about it along the lines of AI, when it works, you don't notice. Right? When you get onto Apple Music or Pandora or whatever you use, Spotify, and you just hit, I want to hear the songs that I like, and it plays you a list, you don't sit there and try to figure out if it's defensible, right? The technology, is it really music I like? Are you sure? Show me your algorithm. Let's get a judge involved. That's not what happens, right? It works. Everyone assumes that it works. It works. We are in the legal industry, so defensibility is a big deal, but I think artificial intelligence, machine learning, that's just a hot thing right now. You can pretty much say AI and ML to anything. If you throw a rock or a stick in Silicon Valley, you'll find someone doing AI and machine learning of ceiling tiles, AI and machine learning of skyscrapers, whatever it is. I've got a friend who does it with cars and parking lots, and it's a really interesting enterprise. I'd say that the other trend in terms of drivers, to kind of stay in line with the thread that we haven't mentioned yet, and this is going to affect litigation much faster than it's going to affect the transactional practices, litigation finance. I think litigation finance is going to be a catalyst for change because they are going to, and I think Jackie was talking about this a little bit, alluding to the idea that when people are putting their money where their mouth is, when they are placing bets and they're finding actuarials, then the data becomes a necessary component to those bets. And that's sort of how those investments are made, especially on a portfolio basis, which will then include defense as well as sort of claims that are being sought. So I think that trends like that, where you do have money that's coming in from outside of lawyers, where outcomes are being sort of bet on, whether it's litigation finance or even just how an in-house corporate legal department views its own legal liability, one way or the other, I think that that's going to move the needle in terms of the application of data, because whoever has the smarter data there will win. And so I think that that's going to be sort of the right test case for a lot of this.
So, I definitely agree with Dan that legal apps is big, it's going to get bigger, but I think that we're always in danger of looking at the Googles, the big, huge companies that have legal apps directors now, right? I ask clients all the time if they have a legal apps director or a manager or someone in-house in their legal department who runs it, and more do. But there are so many other, right, clients. I mean, those are the huge, huge clients, right? I mean, Google has, what, 1,000 lawyers? So it's understandable that legal ops is going to make a difference. It could make a difference for everyone, but when you're talking about a smaller legal department or, legal services that really go outside of a lot of in-house work being done, I do think that AFAs and flat fees, I mean, some of the big, huge companies, Cisco and some of the companies now that have 100% flat fees, I think 5 years ago, people would have thought that would never, ever happen. And attorneys still argue, clients really don't want flat fees, they're more comfortable with hourly. Well, the fact is when you bring software to bear on matters, and you start budgeting, and you start collecting your data, and you start task coding, you are in a huge, tremendous position to do more flat fee and alternative fee work. And more, I think it's been proven that firms can be profitable on these matters. I mean, I know a couple of firms that do various, trademark applications, various things, flat fee, and it's built with a cushion, right? You add that in. So it's as helpful to a law firm as it is for a client to have the certainty and the transparency that they want. And for a firm to be able to build in enough profit, I think this is going to grow the more that firms start to use legal project management softwares. And really, as soon as you start talking about alternative or flat fees, you have to get efficient. So any technology that's brought to bear on work that improves efficiency, that allows for budgeting and allows for predictability going forward after you're tracking what you're doing is going to be, fantastic and really powerful moving forward. And I do think that this is slow, again, I don't know how fast it is, but I think it's very important, it's very potentially effective, and I think it's growing and getting more and more common.
Can I say one thing? Are we allowed to talk to each other, or is that against the rules? No, because I agree that the legal ops trend is going to grow down from the largest, but one thing I would point out is the tools, and we're working with some big legal ops departments, that we're creating for them to optimize are then going to become available to the smaller and smaller legal departments and smaller companies, because they're being driven by ROI-driven companies with venture backing, right? Who are going to say, we want you to sell to the whole market. And the reason we're autonomous and separate is the largest law firm in the world, so there's less than 1% market share. So if the products I'm helping develop could only be sold to less than 1% of the market, my ROI is going to stink. And so I think it's the thoughtful folks understand that you need to develop them in these larger settings, but then you're going to start proliferating them into the whole market.
Just to add on to that, I think that the idea that it's going to trickle down implies that the technology will have easier adoption. It will require less sort of adoption costs. And I think that goes to your point about legal operations, and to your point, really, that some of these smaller shops and smaller corporate legal departments might not need a full-time legal ops person that has sort of project management skills and all of that. If the tools present a dashboard that can now sort of, that have surmounted that hurdle of adoption with, ease of use. And so, it's almost like an Internet of Things of legal practice. It sounds crazy, but like, if you look at your Fitbit and you open up your app, it's not hard to figure out this many steps, this is my heart rate, here's what my sleep look like. You don't need like a kinesiologist or a physical therapist to interpret those results for you. Pretty much anyone now has access because the technology has made that more accessible and easier to use. And so once we can sort of sift out what those benchmarks need to be and the most useful ways to present them from a technology perspective, I think that it's hilarious to be predicting the decline of legal operations when it's still just barely started, but that's almost what it'll look like. It'll be so widespread and proliferated at that point that the technology will short circuit some of that human judgment that's required.
Yeah, I want to kind of dial it back a little bit, because the last statistic that I read is 70% of lawyers in the United States practice in firms of 5 or fewer lawyers. And so, while I agree with everything that's been said here, I think that
you don't have to be nice, Steve. You can disagree.
I'm just a nice guy. The next best thing, the next biggest thing in legal technology is going to be lawyers in these 70% of the firms, in these small firms, not having a fear of technology, like moving beyond and adopting real relevant technology to take on the big firms and to take on the big corporations and to be able to, the only way you're going to do that in a small firm is to have a budget for and invest in the right technology so that you can do more, and I'm coining a phrase of an existing software company, do more, build more, and go home early. Or do more, build more, and take on more work. Because you've adopted the right technology and you've embraced technology to the point where it makes a difference, and you can charge a flat fee, like Jackie was saying. You can charge a flat fee for your services because you know that you can have your potential clients will draft their trust agreement, their financial powers of attorney, their healthcare power of attorney, drafted and printing on the printer, or better yet, not printing on the printer, but producing in the PDF and on an email ready to go to them before they even get in their car in your parking lot. So I think the next big thing in legal technology is going to be the adoption by the small firm in relevant technologies, cloud-based or terrestrial-based, whatever it might be, in relevant technologies to help you do your work more efficiently so that you can deliver these kinds of services to, to mom and pa who come into you in a small town if you're a small town lawyer, or if you're in a big city like Atlanta, if you've got a small practice and someone said to me, Steve, what kind of law did you use to practice? And I said, well, I used to practice crap law. I did every piece of crap that walked in the door. Because I was a small firm lawyer and I needed to put food on the table. And so if 70% of us in the legal profession are practicing in firms of 5 lawyers or fewer, then I think that the next best trend in legal technology is for those firms to demand of the people who are developing technology, give me technology that's going to help me do more, build more, and either go home early or do more, build more, and take on more work, because I don't have the resources right now in my small firm to take on the Dentons of the world or the Cravaths of the world. And I can't compete with them. When I get into a room when I've got a deposition, they laugh at me because I'm a small town lawyer. And we all seen those movies where you cheer on that small town lawyer who beats the big firm. And I think that's really the next trend. So the trend is, and I agree. I think Dan, you said that if clients are demanding of lawyers to be more efficient, and if you go out, if you have a chance, Google a guy named Casey Flaherty. Casey Flaherty was a gentleman who was in-house counsel at Kia Motors. And if I'm not mistaken, it's Kia Motors here on 85 right before you get to the Alabama border. And they wanted to hire a law firm, and they said to the lawyers, we're not going to hire you unless you can prove you were efficient with technology. And almost every firm that they hired failed the simple test of being able to say, what cell is your cursor in a Microsoft Excel document, in a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet? Show me how to boldface and underline this paragraph. Show me how to create styles in Microsoft Word. These firms, the lawyers couldn't do it, the big firm. The small lawyers could do it. The small firm lawyers were able to do it. The big firm lawyers were like, well, but no, I have a button that I push and somebody comes in and makes copies for me. So I think the next trend in legal technology is for the 70% of us that practice in small firms demand of the legal technology innovators to give us technology to make us more efficient so we can do more, build more, and go home.
One thing I'd add to that, and this is hopefully not as dorky as it sounds, but what's changing is the UI UX of these products. And by that I mean, well, I'll give you an example. My 10-year-old daughter couldn't figure out something on her iPhone the other day. And I'm the last guy to ask. And I said, well, did you open the user manual? And she said, what's that? I said, well, normally when you buy an electronic device, or electronic something, you get a big book that you load stuff up. And she's looking at me like, well, why would you do that? Normally I just turn it on and it works, right? And that's where we have to get to, because lawyers are getting busy, they're worried about the billable hours, and they need to turn on the tool, or it needs to be on their desktop, and it has to work. We invested in a matter management platform in the UK called Aperio, and it has this clean Web 2.0 interface. It's intuitive, it's light, it's searchable, it works. Before we invest in something, we always bring in the competitors and do side-by-side comparisons in front of our dentists, lawyers in that relevant practice area to kind of part of our due diligence process, right? And one of the other competitors, I won't name them because I don't want to embarrass them, but one of the lawyers said, one of the administrators in the practice area said, well, we like this other one because it has all this additional functionality. They put everything they could think of in it. And it had way more functionality than the thing we invested in. The problem we're trying to solve is greater transparency in the relationship between law firms and their clients, right? And I said, okay, that has 5 times as much functionality. How's the implementation going? Well, nobody uses it. Why? It's too complex. You know, the lawyers won't take the time to be trained. This one, you turn it on and it works. And that's where I think the small law firms, the democratization of law is going to be the small law firms aren't going to need a legal ops department. They're going to get these tools, they're going to turn it on, and it works.
Does anyone from the audience want to ask any questions on what we've been talking about or contribute? Just using the usual put up your hand, have a question or you want to.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
This is to Steve. I know that the state of North Carolina now allows minority ownership, non-lawyers, minority ownership in law firms. Do you think that that's what's going to drive more of, law firms or law services, or do you think that it can happen without the state of Georgia, for instance, adopting something like that?
I think the issue is that because we're a self-policing profession, and we're we create our own guidelines, and we're guided by the Supreme Courts of the state, and the Supreme Courts they're just made up of us.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this vicious cycle. But I think the market's going to demand it. I think that it's just going to be, it's supply and demand. It's pure, bottom line economics. The market is going to demand that law firms are able to diversify and have minority ownership or more women ownership outside of the who are non-lawyers. I wasn't aware of that in North Carolina. Kudos to North Carolina for that. But I think that it's really just going to be market driven. It's going to be pure economics.
Just to weigh in on that, and to clarify the question, are you referring to like non-lawyer ownership of law firms?
Non-lawyer ownership.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, we talked about this just before. People have different views. People were watching very closely the United Kingdom, the Legal Services Act, and how that's being implemented. That legislation is 9 years old now. We talk about how the professional services firms, the big 4, are now the world's largest law firms, is because they're law firms in the United Kingdom. Because PwC is now a law firm, and KPMG and Deloitte are now law firms. As well as British Telecom is now a law firm. Like, it's weird. Total non-professional services companies are now law firms. And I think there's going to be a wait-and-see model. The United States tends to be very protectionist, as Steve was saying, and really defend the profession from that. But I think that those defenses are going down, and I think that change is going to start to happen in those areas. And I think that it's going to happen very suddenly. And I think the reason why that's going to happen very suddenly is because as much as we talk about revenue for law firms staying flat, right? I don't know if you've all read sort of what It's All in the Wild, or the City Report, or the Thomson Reuters one. It's the demand for legal services is rising, but law firm revenues are flat. And at the very same time as that's happening, there is a huge unmet need of people who are not necessarily large corporations who are retaining huge law firms. And I think that I was reading this guy, what the heck was his name? Something Davies from like the 60s. Any political science people in here? It's like the theory of political revolutions. And basically his view was that like when there's an unmet need that goes so unmet versus what's being offered, you have like a revolution in Egypt or whatever it is, right? Like you have like massive revolutions. And it's what's called the J-curve theory. It's like there's always like this gap between the need and what's being provided, and it goes like this for a while. And when this drops off, when the need goes substantially unmet, you have like massive points of upheaval and revolution, right? There's sort of like a tipping point. So I would say it might not be a boiling frog, but it actually might look like, sort of insurrection or whatever it is. And so I think that the legal services model will be challenged sort of with a bang and not with sort of a gradual curve. I think the question is, we place bets on when that's going to happen.
Yeah, I think it'll be more gradual. I mean, I don't think it's going to suddenly, happen. And I think it's because we do have a lock on our own profession. I mean, we're not dumb, and I always say, you know what, healthcare had the Affordable Care Act. They had to change We don't have that. And until we have something like that, yeah, then it'll happen. I just am a little more skeptical as to how soon it's gonna happen.
I think what will help that, is the number of state bars that can start to take their own actions and essentially break form from the ABA, which I'm a fan of the ABA, you know, I consider myself a lawyer to my DNA, but at the end of the day, like, they're talking about taking away the ABA's ability to accredit law schools, right? They're talking about ways, essentially some of these gateways and barriers and defenses that the ABA is supposed to do to protect the profession, because it's a fiduciary relationship, there's an ethical professional responsibility and all these things, are becoming eroded in sort of inflection points. So I don't think the wall's gonna just come crumbling down all in one day, but I do think that there will be substantial moments where I think that the legal profession will sort of be confronted with massive movements of change.
One of the accelerants of the change when you have non-lawyer ownership of law firms, probably in other markets, is going to be the ability to access alternative sources of capital. Because the legal industry reinvests in terms of R&D at a staggeringly low level, under 1% by most people's measures.
But how do you buy the
Because only
Teslas?
lawyers can own law firms.
What's that?
Because only lawyers can
Right.
own law
They're
firms.
like Teslas.
But when you go into other markets where non-lawyer ownership is allowed, eventually access to capital markets are going to start bringing in capital, and capital is often driven into R&D spending. The public accounting firms and consulting firms get access to those markets are spending at 5 to 10% of revenue of much larger organizations. So take 10% of revenue of a $10 billion firm versus 1% of a $1 billion firm, and you're going to start to see some capital flowing in, and it's going to start to dramatically change, I think, some of the dynamics. Where is the tipping point? I don't know. Is the U.S. the first market for that? And probably not. But you're going to start to see more global players with significant capital. Telecommunications invests at 13%, biotech at a higher percent. Law is one of the lowest reinvestment because we understand the partnership model and the intergenerational conflict and that frenzy push to collect cash at the end of the quarter so they can then distribute it all back out. Public ownership or non-lawyer ownership and more long-term capital ownership eventually of law firms, I think, is going to start to change that dynamic pretty significantly.
And I think there's two.
Sorry, I'm just going to open it up to the audience if anyone has any other questions. Sorry, yes.
Do you foresee a restructuring of the law firm model, being that of having the legal ops department instead of the law firm model, if you would, but having the actual operations of the law firm, the marketing, everything else being an entirely separate subsidiary to be able to function, whether it be from an office space perspective to marketing to accounting, etc., which is a similar model to Deloitte. But essentially just isolating the lawyers and turning that into a legal ops world, but still having that separate entity that is investable that can be driven in other areas as well.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, I think we are already starting to see the evolution towards that, and it's the structure where you isolate the legal services into an entity that's allowed to operate jurisdictionally, but law firms do so many other things that are not legal related in terms of advisory services and consulting services, and so I think you're going to start to see more of like just happening in accounting, all of the shared services functions are going to get pulled out and pushed into scaled kind of operations or real estate functions. One of the largest expense of law firms is after, payroll is real estate. And you walk around this building, you would see a whole bunch of empty offices because they're thankfully out visiting their clients. So I think we're going to see alternative business structures with more non-actual hardcore legal services pulled out and put into scaled operations, which is going to drive the consolidation. I think we're going to start to see much more interesting revenue models as everyone wants to get away from the billable hour, moving to the freemium model, more SaaS type models where you have a free layer, then a subscription layer, and then an a la carte pricing scheme above it. So I think the revenue model is going to evolve. The billable hour, what was the quote? News of my death have been greatly exaggerated. It will be around for a long time, but it's going to be enhanced with these alternative revenue models. Think SaaS models and freemium models.
And just one note on that is that a lot of those operations are being outsourced also. So they're not even being kept in-house, but being scaled in a global way because the firms are actually not doing it anymore. That's rampantly popular in the United Kingdom. and catching on in the United States.
So the woman in the front.
Yeah, I mean, I think the greatest fear I see, having been a small solo practitioner, is what about the dilution of the quality of the legal services? I know that, there's an assumption that technology often will improve, the speed or the rate of whatever you're, doing discovery for or all the analytics. But I mean, you have the Georgia bar exam where, 90 people who allegedly failed passed. I mean, so, when you have that issue coming up, and also, are you predicting lawyers becoming obsolete because of that?
Oh, can I do this one?
No, I'm going to start with Steve. No, I'm going to start with Steve at the end, and then we can
You're
actually.
imposing order.
Yes, ma'am.
Robots taking over the world.
Yes, Mary's taking over the world. So we'll start with Steve, and if you can address that, plus that's one of our questions, whether robots, so you can each go down and answer it.
So, I don't think lawyers will ever be obsolete. I think, and I question the whole thing, the whole concept of artificial intelligence as it applies to the legal profession, because I think to a certain extent, you have to have the human logical factor to be able to isolate particular issues that are presented in front of a lawyer. The dilution of legal services is kind of it's a really broad topic. I mean, I think we could spend the next couple of hours talking about that. But as far
I'll
as
just pick one small one. I used to be an immigration attorney, right? And then right when this whole immigration reform was about to pass, the giant tax company, I forget, they were going to start filing basically immigration forms together with, your tax returns. So they were going to combine filing, getting a tax refund from somebody and filing these immigration forms. And, there was this huge reaction from the American Immigration Lawyers Association saying that's unauthorized practice of law. You're having people file forms, right? But at the same time, USCIS, Immigration Services, is embedding free forms in their website, allowing people to file things on their own. So I guess the question there is, with the advent of technology, where people are self-helping,
LegalZoom, right?
So, but at the same time, how it does help a huge number of consumers who don't need complex legal services, but it definitely harms people who need something more complex.
Sure. So, and I think that leads into another interesting topic when it comes to that particular topic, where this whole idea of self-help, this whole idea of does technology provide access to legal services to people who can't afford legal services? And something that's very unique that's happening here in Georgia is, and I forget exactly the name of the entity, but it's a Georgia Legal Incubator, where it's giving lawyers who want to go out on their own, so small firm lawyers, people who are in that 70% that I keep harping on and saying, that the focus of a lot of the efforts of legal technology needs to be on the small firms and the small firm lawyers. But the Legal Incubator provides an opportunity for lawyers to address issues for people who are either what I call low bono or pro bono, and they need access to legal services, but they can't afford access to legal services. And at the same time, the incubator provides a mentorship for young lawyers or people who are coming out of large firms who want to provide legal services on their own in a small firm, but really don't know how to do it. They don't know how to. I think I've had a conversation with almost everybody in the room talking about how bad lawyers are such bad business people. We don't really know how to run our firms as businesses, where we hire someone to do it and we kind of cross our fingers and go, gee, I hope I know what she's doing. I hope she knows what she's doing. So to answer your question, to kind of go back to the core of what you're saying, I don't think that there's a dilution of legal services in the future. I think it's going to be enhanced. I think you've got things like the legal incubators that are coming up. You've got the challenges for lawyers. I was at a firm in Augusta a couple of months ago who basically they felt very threatened by LegalZoom. They felt very threatened by the whole idea that technology is going to replace legal services. And I don't think that is going to be. I mean, I think at its core you can say, okay, and LegalZoom can only go so far. But how many of us say, I need to do a will, or I need to have my corporation incorporated in these states, but I've got this special circumstance, and that's where the lawyer comes in. That's where we have to hone in on informing the potential client base that there is no substitute for a law, for sitting down and getting the counsel of an attorney, just like there's no substitute for sitting down with your doctor. You know, you can go on WebMD, you can self-diagnose. You can go to Publix and put your arm into a blood pressure machine and find out, you know, well, I might have high blood pressure, but I gotta go see a doctor and find out. And I think it's the same thing. We have to inform the public, we have to inform our potential clients that they need us. They need a certain amount of logic and legal expertise applied to their specific situation. So yes, we're threatened. Yes, the profession, I don't want to say threatened by, yes, the profession is challenged by LegalZoom. Yes, the profession is challenged by non-legal entities sort of trying to get in and provide legal services. And, you know, in the state of New Jersey, you still can't close on a piece of real estate without each party having being represented by a lawyer. And in Florida, any Tom, Dick, or Harry can close your loan. So, you know, I think that, you know, again, state by state is different, but overall, I think that technology, we can harness technology, and then we can educate the public to say, you know what, we're still a very needed profession.
Okay, so a couple of things. First, I think it is risky. I think that when you have B2C legal services, you have people, some of whom have extremely low education levels, extremely low ability to understand, right, what quickly can become very complex. Now, I was a litigator. I saw all the things that went wrong, right, among business clients in sophisticated deals. It's very apparent to me when I read through documents, it's not easy. And so I think that there is a risk. I mean, does that mean that we should just say, you know, forget it, we're not going to use technology to do, you know, agreements that are fairly simple? No. But the problem is, I don't have a huge level of confidence sometimes that a consumer is going to know, right? They don't know when they need a lawyer versus when they can get the form. Because it is, even the Q&As that are really made into layman's terms, it can get very complicated. Secondly, I have a constant concern with lawyers and business being taken away. And I think a lot of young lawyers, look, I spend a lot of my time doing recruiting, right? And every big law firm wants the same associate who's a rock star to go from that firm to their firm to their firm. You know, they don't want anyone who's outside of that group, right? So you have a young group of attorneys who absolutely, e-discovery, all of the document review, the software for due diligence now for big deals, it should be used. But let's not kid ourselves. It's taking jobs absolutely from younger attorneys. And so that's a concern. They're not getting the training they used to get. I mean, I was lucky, although I was at a big firm, I went to court right away, I got to do complex things. It's not like that anymore. So sometimes they can't even get the job that's going to support them, right? Because the low-level work is gone. And, you know, they essentially are really at risk of never learning how to practice law. I'm a big believer in young lawyers learning how to practice law first. And then go, I mean, I'm not talking about forever, right, a couple of years, but law school teaches you how to think, right? Does not teach you how to practice. And I think that's a good, strong skill set that's very needed. So I do have concerns. We're never gonna need, you know, only technology, right? But the other thing is, then you have more mature lawyers, right? More sophisticated, big firm, small firm, it doesn't matter. The soft skills have to get better because that's where the competition is going to be. It's going to be on the front end, advising, preventing, even in-house attorneys, right? You bring them in on the product development end, and you need an attorney who's going to be advising and counseling and not doing the low-end work, which the software should do. Right? So you have another skill set also that needs to be developed among attorneys that quite frankly is, law firms they don't hire that way. I mean, I interview that way, I look for that, because I understand what I think is important, but most law firms still don't, you know, hire for those soft skills and that real, you know, the emotional intelligence. It's those skills that are going to become more of a premium because the software is going to get more complex, so there will still be a need for sure. But it's shifting and it's changing. And so there are concerns. Lawyer rates also for young lawyers pushed way down. What do you have when you have outsourcing and you have LPOs that hire lawyers right on a contract basis? You have very low rates. And so, but some of these are sort of personal preoccupations of mine, right? But they're directly relevant as to where the business and where the profession is going.
So my answer at the end of the day is yes. Robots are coming for our jobs. And that's all I have to say. No, actually, here's the thing. I was speaking to a wise person at my company, and he was saying technology will make lawyers more efficient. It doesn't ever, you'll never get rid of the practice of law. But, and this is sort of unsolicited advice to everybody in this room who's involved in any kind of practice in any way. Like, be better than your peers by using technology. Like, kick their asses by using technology. Like, that's what you should be doing. That's what every young lawyer should do. That's what everyone in any law firm should do. Like, just do it. Like, learn it. And if you're like, well, I'm not tech savvy, then get someone else on your team that can do it that you can team up with. Or, bring that function into your law firm, or hire an outside company that you know is in your stable, so that when Casey Flaherty comes knocking to ask you, like, what cell is this in Excel, you can be like, well, at least I know someone who can tell me that answer right away, if it's not me myself. But make it yourself. Like, it's, to Dan's point, the software is becoming easy enough to use, and we're evolving at that level of technology that you should be able to walk up and use it. So that's sort of a side sort of general exhortation. I think that technology will absolutely be becoming for some attorneys primary source of revenue. There's, in my mind, that is unquestionably true. There are lawyers out there who are in the business of it's like in the artisanal, kind of cottage industry business of law. And I think of cobblers and shoemakers or whatever it might be, and I guess they still exist. I saw one in Inman Park. But the truth is, most of the people are buying their shoes from Zappos or DSW or wherever they're getting their shoes from, Amazon, the running stores, whatever, because they're being mass produced because technology exists, and those people, that trade no longer exists in that way, right? Now, that doesn't mean that entire practices will be eradicated, but it means that the lawyer plus technology will be far more productive, to Steve's point, and they should harness that productivity. And I think the instinct to say that no, we need to somehow justify our existence, that we're faced with kind of this existential crisis that technology presents, and we need to essentially be backwards looking and stick our heads in the sand and come up with reasons to rationalize our existence instead of simply saying yeah, we need to change. We need to evolve our practice. Maybe this practice where I create software licenses for everyone, for my client, now that software licenses are now becoming insanely standardized, and it's already going to procurement functions in large companies, right? It's already becoming things that don't require the judgment of a lawyer. Okay, maybe I ought to go find another area of practice where I can thrive and grow. Maybe I need to be flexible and agile with my skill sets. Maybe I need to be the person who adopts this technology and can tell people I can do hundreds of their license contracts, for the cost of what used to be 5, right? Maybe that's what it looks like. But absolutely, technology is coming to replace a lot of the functions of law. I don't think that means the lawyer will ever wink out of existence in our kind of human society. I think if you ask anyone that practices law, and I was a litigator, is there more that you could have done to represent your client, but you just ran out because you were at 300 billable hours and you were seeing things and whatever, and you couldn't even function straight? There was always more work to be done. There are other motions that could have been filed. There's more that could have been done in the zealous advocacy of the client, but budget was a constraint, time was a constraint, lack of technology assistance was a constraint. When those constraints are lifted, the practice of law will continue to grow and meet many more of the unmet needs. But some of the high volume commodity work that can be easily replaced with technology will be replaced with technology, as it should be, is my humble opinion.
I guess I'm consistent with that, and I'd add a few more examples. The notion of the machine replacing the human, I think, is somewhat silly. That trusted advisor role will always exist. But what we'll learn is that human plus machine is better than human or machine. And so let's get out of the law. The scalpel was invented 5,000 years ago in Egypt. Our chairman of things always talks to this story. Now we have robotic-assisted surgery. You're not going to let a robot operate on you, but a doctor who's enabled by a robot gets better results, right? And so that's really important. Let's get back into the law and get a little dorkier. There's something called Fantasy SCOTUS, run by Dan Katz, a professor, one of our advisors, and I don't know if you've seen it, where they try to get all of these experts to predict the results of the upcoming Supreme Court docket. Esteemed law professors, partners at the most prestigious law firms, and the winner is a guy who lives in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens who's not even a lawyer. He's actually an actually smart enough guy. But what they learned is they created an algorithm that got it right about 60%. They got an expert, this guy in Queens, who gets it right about 80%. But when the smartest person in the room is the room, when they got the super experts, half the crowd that did well, added that to the algorithm, you got the best outcome in terms of predicting it. Because the machine has a hard time seeing left turns, the top half of the experts did. And so the machines, what they're going to do is they're going to take away some of the drudgery, some of those tasks that require massive processing of structured and unstructured data, and the ability to kind of move at incredible rates. My wife was an M&A lawyer, had a deal back in the day where she had to read 1,000 leases of retail stores that were being acquired by her client, and find the assignment clause and the change of control clause. Well, by the third night, staying up all night, she couldn't even spell assignment, right? The machine had a much higher accuracy rate, but what it did is it kicked those 1,000 leases into 3 buckets. These 700 are standard, identical. You don't even have to really read them. These 200 have these minor changes. Here's a table. And these 100, lawyer, you better spend your time really reading these because there's something weird going on. So that machine is enabling that lawyer to A, get a little more sleep and do a much, much better job. The point is disaggregation of the workflows of law and taking those repetitive elements, those low-level tasks, and young lawyers are going to be delighted because they don't have to stay up 3 nights in a row trying to find the word assignment, right? They're going to be able to move faster up the apprenticeship ladder and become that trusted advisor more quickly. So one of the target of a lot of technology is not necessarily that young lawyer. If I was running an LPO shop in Bangladesh, I would be much more worried about what technology is going to do to my business than a young associate at a big law firm. Because the technology is going to take that stuff that's been outsourced, that was so low level and repetitive, before it's going to attack a mid-level associate at the top.
By the way, we're having an LPO shop in India, and we're not, it's totally cool. We're not worried at all. We're not worried.
Some controversy.
No, we're not worried at all because they are faster adopters of technology than lawyers are.
Fair point. I mean,
and subject matter expertise, the process expertise that's coming through those outsourcing shops, it goes beyond labor arbitrage. I mean, I hear you completely, but absolutely they're not standing still.
And one of the other challenges, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, if they can evolve as well, but remember, a lot of clients don't want to pay to train those young associates, right? So if you can have the machine doing the absolutely mundane stuff and the training can be focused on the more value-added stuff, I think realization is going to actually go up. And say, we had the machine find all the assignment clauses. Our young associate read those 200 table and found 10, and then kicked them up to the partner for her to read those. I think the clients can kind of buy that value proposition because the machine will never do everything. That's kind of silly, I think. Good.
Okay, so we're going to take, we've covered almost everything here. I just wanted to add, I mean, I grew up in the accounting world, and it's that whole same thing. I mean, you can put a bunch of there were 25 years ago plus, there were analytic packages that you could throw your financials in for doing all your analysis. But nothing takes away professional judgment. That's what we always said, and I think that's what everyone said here. But as a consumer of law services, I can tell you I was very frustrated recently when I hired a lawyer to do something, and I had to handwrite all kinds of things, and then I sent her an Excel spreadsheet with the same information, and then I still had to go to their offices and watch them put it all in, and it's unacceptable. And as a consumer, I will vote with my feet. So as lawyers, even though I have a law degree, but I'm not an attorney, as lawyers, you can decide, well, is Mary the client I want because she's going to demand technology? So there's going to be lawyers that work with the Marys, and there'll be lawyers that work with people who do. Some people are that cottage lawyer. They want to sit down and meet face to face and answer the repetitive questions. But I think ultimately there's room for everything. The unmet need, there's some statistics from LegalZoom on the unmet need and how many, I think it's 1 in 2 people need some type of legal services a year, and 1 in 7 seek and actually work with a lawyer. So if everybody, maybe we'll take one more question and everybody can answer it once. And and then we'll move on to Eric Starwintop. Does anyone else have a question, a burning question? Yes.
Oh, that's cool. So I'm not a lawyer, I'm purely technology. So this is coming from more of the technology adoption aspect. So there's a myriad of tools for lawyers. We've got document comparison, we've got the client matter tools, there's plenty of those out there. And for me, as someone in technology, I love creating tools that save people time. But the problem with that is that, at least in the legal space, is the billable time model. Do you find that the billable time, like hourly time, like you're billing, when you're working with your client, you're billing, do you feel that that hinders technology adoption? And if so, what do you think is a way to overcome that?
I think it's evolving. I think it's coming.
Political
Well,
answer.
No, I think that that's an excellent question. There's a really good, a couple really good points to make about that. Is number one, I read some article that in the 1970s, one of the state Supreme Court said something about the fact that the billable hour was the only ethical way to charge a client. You couldn't charge a client a flat fee and make an ungodly amount per billable hour, that you had to establish value by the amount of time that you put into a particular case, and thus was born the billable hour. But now that technology is here and able to be adopted, the question really becomes, does the lawyer fear technology because you're going to be so much more efficient, you can't bill as much for it? And that kind of leads into something that Jackie was saying about what we call value billing, is establishing value for your services. And I'm going to do these services, or what I like to call project billing. I'm going to create your case as a project to me, or I'm going to break it into 3 different phases. And I'm going to charge you every time I hit a milestone, you're going to pay me more. And if you think about it, the billable hour is a really scary thing. When a client walks into your office and you say, okay, I charge $300 an hour. You have to give me a $5,000 retainer. When I use the $5,000 retainer up, you have to give me another $5,000. I don't know when I'm going to use it up. I can use it up tomorrow. I can use it up in 3 months. But then you have to pay me again. If you don't pay me, well, you better beware, because if you don't pay me, I'm going to withdraw from your case. I'm going to leave you in the lurch. So you have to continue to pay me. And by the way, did I mention I charge $300 an hour? So I think that there's a trend that we've talked about. I've been doing this legal technology thing for 18 years. We've talked about it for 18 years plus. That lawyers have got to get out of that mindset of the billable hour. So to your point, I think that technology gives us the ability to be more efficient, and being more efficient means that you have to change the way that you're going to charge your client. You're going to shift the risk. You're going to say, I'm going to charge you $15,000 to take you from the beginning all the way to the end, and I'm going to charge you $5,000 phases. And there's going to be 3 phases, but you have the technology behind you to be even more efficient. And it's not going to take you 100 hours to complete each phase. It's going to take you 20. So I think that it's a trend that has been coming for 18 years, and I think we're just at the point where the hockey stick is going to take off. And the billable hour, and there's lots of studies on it. There's some firms out there that have really bucked the trend and have bucked against the billable hour. But I really, really believe that change is coming, and it's coming very soon.
The billable hour is absolutely a deterrent to doing things efficiently. I worked at a big firm. I was really busy, okay, and I have a fairly short attention span, so I was too bored if I spent too much time on anything, right? And I always thought of things from my client's point of view. I was always nervous about how big the bill was going to be. But I also had my eye on how many hours a month I could bill so I could make 2,000 hours and get the bonus that I wanted to get, right? I mean, and the billable hour leads directly to compensation structure in larger firms. So this is a problem, right? It's a huge problem. But yes, I mean, people have been, right, wanting to get rid of the billable hour. Those of us who want things to move on and adopt technology and process and all this great stuff, of course, we want to move on from the billable hour. It's really, really, really entrenched. And it's almost like, it amazes me. I look at attorneys and I go, here is a group of people as a whole who are above average intelligence people, some really, really smart. And it's like they look at a simple problem and they're like, I can't figure out what to do about this. I mean, it's unbelievable because it's so ingrained. And I have had people tell me, and sometimes I do believe them, that some clients are more comfortable billing hours. And you know why? Because the client is an attorney in-house and they build hours. So they lack the imagination that their outside counsel lacks, and so why would anything change? So I mean, yes, it's changing. Is the minute you say I want to bill based on something other than the billable hour, you have to be efficient, right? It immediately cranks up technology, process improvement, all the other awesome things that make you more efficient at what you do. But when you are tied to that billable hour, it's a hindrance, absolutely.
I'll just say I agree with all that. The pressure has to come from corporate counsel to change their buying behaviors, and what they're doing instead of changing their buying behaviors is that they're hiring more people. And that's actually the increasing trend. 51% of corporate counsel departments are hiring, while only 26% are seeking to reduce. I think that the billable hour is not the, I think creatively about this, if it's so firmly entrenched, again, just get out there and kick your competition's ass and let everyone, that's where some of these, I agree with the hollow middle kind of like, these kind of full service law firms that have been billing a lot of hours, that's gonna fade into the dust. There has to be integrated focus and a specialized level of expertise and practice that you can provide. In addition to that, technology-enabled practice that can enable you to do it more efficiently. But if you're gonna be on the billable hour, and I think this is where lead generation becomes a very important thing, because if you can do more work, you better have more work lined up for you to do. But if you can do more work, and if those leads are coming at you, then you can spend less time and be more efficient. If that becomes your opportunity cost, the actual sacrificing clients and more work that you're able to do, but that you don't have time to do because you're inefficient, that's when the billable hour will become, will continue to be the currency that everyone understands and the language everyone speaks, but will be able to become a measure of value that actually the needle actually moves. So for instance, if it takes you 5 hours, to research a motion to dismiss and then like 20 hours to write it, but with the help of lots of litigation tools, you can now do that in 6 hours total, then you can write 5 more motions to dismiss or whatever, I'm doing the math wrong, 4 more motions to dismiss for the clients, right? Total, which means that you can actually accomplish more work and steal more work from your competitors. And the next time one of them tries to spend 25 hours on a motion to dismiss, the client's about to slash their bill. You can actually be a driver of efficiency if you decide to be efficient with the billable hour. So I agree that it's a problem, it's a deterrent, and it's inherent to the structure, and there's all the backwardness there, but I don't think that it's impossible to be efficient in a billable hour ecosystem.
So, Dan, I know that you probably have
I have a
something.
great answer.
Okay,
I'm sorry.
could you say it in 30 seconds because we don't want to make your.
Yeah, no, I mean, a quick answer is one of the most relationship-destroying devices I've ever seen in my business career is the law firm invoice, right? And to paraphrase Bernie Sanders, I don't care about your damn invoice, right? I want my problem solved. And the productivity paradox is offensive to most clients, whereas if this person takes 5 hours versus that person taking 3 hours, the 5-hour person is rewarded better. That's just so, right? That's why we need to move to a revenue model that is more like a SaaS kind of model, which, by the way, from being a business guy, from a valuation perspective, $1 of recurring revenue is much more highly valued from an enterprise perspective than $1 of billable services. So these technologies are going to evolve the revenue model. They're going to decrease the billable hour. They're going to increase relationship value. My old consulting firm, we got rid of the billable hour 20 years ago. This is not new, getting rid of the billable hour. Look at consulting, look at accounting, look at engineering, look at architecture. But what it does is you get those fees, you solve the problem, they know the value equation, it increases your stickiness, and it increases your win rates, if you can discuss it that way. Did I hit 30?
I don't know, I
All right, that's
can't
all right, then.
add. I just wanted to add that there's the whole idea of the SaaS model, but the whole idea of the flat fee. And you're paying for the value, because we paid a lawyer a certain amount of money to fix a family issue. I didn't care, I wrote that check, I knew that was the only check I was gonna write, and then when he solved the problem, I was happy. So I don't care whether he spent 5 hours or 500 hours, my problem is solved. And that's the basis for any kind of transaction in all the industries that Dan mentioned. So I think it's time for the legal industry to leave it behind, but as an accountant, and I'm sure Steve will agree with me, you still need to record your hours, because otherwise how are you going to figure out what those flat fees are and on all of your other models. So I wanted to thank the panelists. It was a lot of fun hearing from all of you. And Jules has a lovely parting gift. this is our Darwin Talk, which is a 5-minute talk. If you've seen TED Talks or Ignite Talks, that is what Eric is going to do. And this is Eric Tannenblatt, who is the co-leader of the public policy practice at Dentons here. And Eric has a really interesting background. He's formerly an aide to President George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. He was chief of staff to Governor Sonny Perdue. And he often writes on the intersection of technology and regulation. His interesting fact is, well, he's got 3, but I'm going to read all of them. He once drank scotch with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, which we can talk about afterwards during the demo table.
It's pretty cool.
He also renamed a popular candy, which he will show you afterwards also. And finally, he was featured in Inside Wrestling, a professional wrestling magazine, at the age of 9. So he's now going to talk on this.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you today. As I was introduced, my name is Eric Tannenblatt, and I lead the public policy and regulation practice at the largest law firm in the world. I worked for 2 presidents. I worked for a United States Senator, and I was the chief of staff to the governor of this great state of Georgia. And so you're probably wondering why someone who has a career in government is talking about thoughts on disruption. But it's because of my vantage point that I understand the greatest challenges that the innovation economy is facing today, and that's regulation. No incumbent business is immune to the threat of disruption, but those operating in acutely regulated verticals like healthcare and lending are especially exposed to a looming threat. Why? Well, regulation breeds commercial complacency because it sustains the status quo by making difficult the entrance of new competitors in an industry. When government keeps would-be competitors at bay, the value proposition for incumbents to innovate is nil. But if the disruption ratio tilts, a sliding measure of market satisfaction relative to the cost of innovation, even those shielded by red tape will be vulnerable. Incumbent business understand how to leverage public policy. Often, they play an integral role in the formation of the industry's regulation. This makes them very dangerous. Entrenched organizations have spent sometimes decades cultivating political and regulatory capital that they can and will leverage when threatened. That was the case when the taxi commissions went to the map with Uber, or the hoteliers sparred with Airbnb. In both cases, neither Airbnb nor Uber fully appreciated the depth of their rival lobbies' political capital wells. They got savvy eventually, but not before spending millions in public affairs campaigns that leveraged the disruption ratio. The public was fed up with the inefficiency of taxi cabs and the cost of hotels and were ready to fight regulations for their new freedoms. But the next Uber or the next Airbnb won't have the luxury of operating in ignorance of regulation or rivals. Incumbent businesses are waiting, ready to squash any possible threats. In my experience, I've learned that there are 4 questions that every startup, no matter the industry, should ask if they hope to stand a chance of fending off a regulatory onslaught. Number 1, what are the existing statutes, licensure requirements, and taxes in my industry? In telemedicine, there are scope of practice laws. In ride sharing, there are driver security checks and liability coverage requirements. In home sharing, there are hotel taxes. In each case, these liabilities crept up late term to stunt growth. Because disruptors are often outgrowths of highly regulated spaces, it's critical you audit all relevant public policy at your launch, not years later. Number 2, whose bottom line do you threaten? Just as important as auditing public policy is the need to audit the entrenched organizations your service may threaten. In some instances, these incumbent businesses have spent a half-century cultivating relationships with lawmakers and regulators, and those relationships will be leveraged at your expense. Number 3, what's the political environment for regulators, lawmakers, and third-party shareholders? Does the nature of your business or perhaps personal reputation of principals and funders and predispose the political class or outside influencers to affect hostility or warmth to your service? Are you disrupting an industry like those in medicine with optometrists and nurses, in construction with labor unions, and even trial lawyers? They are explicitly protected by the political class. And number 4, what's the incumbent industry's reputation in the press? If the disruptor ratio legitimately leans in your favor, that is, the status quo cannot sustain itself by itself any longer, then you already have some sense of this. If you're truly disrupting an industry, it's because you're doing something better than the incumbents. But in many cases, the public doesn't immediately recognize that incumbent industries could be serving them better. By strategically influencing public perception through the press, you indirectly influence regulatory rulemaking and legislative decisions. These questions aren't a panacea for regulation, only regulatory ignorance. I've seen equally promising disruptors thrive and fizzle. What separated them, though, was an appreciation for public policy and a willingness to shape it to their advantage. Thank you.
Excellent, and I think you have a slide with the questions up there too, right?
Yeah, those are the 4 questions.
Cheat sheet, right there.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So that is it. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much to Dentons for hosting us and being our sponsor for this event. It was awesome to be here. This was a great first event in Atlanta, and we look forward to the next one.
And if you still have a little bit of energy, go check out some of the technology that's here, and you can actually touch it. So.
And eat and drink as well.
Yes.
Thank you.